Today's discussion, sorry, I'm fixing just the chat here. Today's discussion is devoted to the COVID crisis in cities, a tale of two lockdowns, as we have entitled this webinar. We have about 500 participants registered. We very much look forward to the discussions with our guest speakers that I am thanking very much for their time and for their participation in this session. Maybe before we get started, few quick reminders in terms of logistics. We are in a webinar format, so all the participants are by default muted. You can intervene or participate whenever you want via the Q&A section of the Zoom, so feel free to drop questions that the OECD team will be collecting. Feel free also to engage with us on Twitter, on the social media. Our account is OECD_local. You can use the hashtag Champion Mayors. This will be a very lively webinar. To the extent possible, we'll have a series of very short presentations as an introduction, and then we'll have many opportunities for interaction with all of you through a series of Zoom polls, but also at the end, a good 15-20 minute session for questions and answers. So I'm very delighted to welcome you all for this webinar that is really devoted to how champion mayors are leading the way in responding to the pandemic of COVID-19, looking in particular at how they are protecting vulnerable groups and also looking beyond the current crisis to put in place the recovery efforts that are needed. We have, as you have seen from the program, 3 of our champion mayor cities represented. I'm delighted to welcome the mayor of the city of Ljubljana in Slovenia, Mayor Zoran Janković. We also have with us a representative from the city of Montreal in Canada. Welcome to Rosannie Filato, member of the executive committee who's responsible for public safety. And I'm also delighted to welcome Michiel Grauss, the vice mayor for poverty reduction of the city of Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And we also have with us our colleague Claire CHARBIT at the OECD, who is heading the unit that deals with territorial dialogue and migration within the OECD Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, regions and cities that is directed by Mrs. LAMIA CHAOUI. I will give the floor to LAMIA right now to set the scene. In addition to directing the CFE, where the Champion Mayors initiative is located, LAMIA is actually the architect and the mastermind of this global coalition of 60 mayors who have actually made inclusive growth and the fight against inequality a policy priority. This is a network that was set up 4 years ago. The initiative is chaired by Mayor Hidalgo from Paris. It gathers cities as diverse as New York, Freetown, Seoul, or the 3 cities that are represented today, Ljubljana, Montreal, and Rotterdam. With no further ado, I give the floor to LAMIA for some welcoming remarks, and then we will move to the spotlight on the different cities that are with us today.
Thank you very much, Aziza. Mayor Janković, Deputy Mayor from Rotterdam, representative from Montreal, and all the other participants. I would like just to make 3 points because today we are here to listen to you. The first point I would like is to recall, the original objective of the Inclusive Growth Initiative at the OECD, which was launched at a time where actually we were just after the financial crisis. The OECD members were experiencing a rise in inequalities, and the OECD had documented the rise of inequalities for many decades, but they were much more visible during the crisis. And we decided at that time to launch this initiative, not as a social agenda, but much more as an economic agenda. Because the idea was to provide equal opportunities to all to address the lack of playing field among individuals and among firms, instead of just focusing on redistributive measure. We also at that time documented the cost of inequality on economic growth. And you may remember that this is an agenda that maybe 15 years ago did not really exist. When we launched it, there was a little appetite for that. And then it becomes something that today everybody is talking about, inclusive growth. All international organizations, all national governments, they have taken this on board. So when we started at the national level, and we decided to went local because we also had documented already at that time that inequalities within countries were not just among individuals and between firms, but also among different places and within places, especially large cities. We also decided to go with this creation of this global coalition of mayors, because we did recognize the important role of mayors of being key leaders in fighting the inequalities within their own cities, but also advocating for a new economic model. So it's not a network of cities, there are plenty, it's really a network of mayors. When the mayor is not in charge, of course, the city is no more represented. So we decided at that time to focus on mayors, and we started with New York, Paris, and a few others. And over time now we have 60 mayors from around the world. They are from different political parties, because all mayors around the world, they are facing the same problems and they are taking actions. It's independently of what they believe is good or not, they have to find solutions. We are using this platform to exchange information, but also to inform our government, because OECD is an international organization that is dealing with national governments. So it's a way to give in a global platform like the OECD, but also we often report to other global platforms like the G20 or the G7. So this was my first point. The second point is really related to the question of COVID. The OECD has immediately shifted its focus of its work to assist members in all the different policies, the impact of COVID and what will be the implications. And of course, our center has worked on different things, including on cities. And at the end of this of my intervention, we'll show you a slide where you have actually what we call the OECD platform, and where we are posting some information, including there is an extensive analysis of what cities have been doing that was done by Aziza and her team. I just want to quote something, which is a quote from Hidalgo, the chair of the initiative. She said, "The crisis exacerbates inequalities, highlights injustice, and makes unacceptable what the resignation of daily life has sometimes ended up making us tolerate." So today, actually, this issue that we have been experiencing in large cities are much more visible. COVID made them much more visible. So what we have seen, and it's extensively laid out in this policy note, that cities were very much focusing on addressing first the sanitary crisis, the health crisis. They have been at the front line. And of course, immediately we have seen that the impact on individuals was really asymmetric, and they had to provide assistance to vulnerable population especially during the confinement period. And I know that during this session, you're going to talk about the impact on different types of groups: migrants, the poor, the refugee, the elderly, the women, the homeless, and so on. But with the confinement taking place, at least in some countries, a lot of discussion now is focusing on the question of mobility and transport. We need to find new alternative modes of transport. It looks like COVID has been a positive driver toward the acceptance of more sustainable mode of transport. In Paris, 6 months ago, everybody was criticizing what the mayor is doing in terms of bicycling, and today everybody wants to cycle. So there is a change, there's a lot of discussion of what will be the new mode of transport, because we know that COVID is going to last. And of course, many cities now are engaged into this type of reflection about what could be the new opportunity to accelerate our ambitions for more inclusive and sustainable cities. This question is obviously going to last, But for that, we will need more innovative ideas. And here I want to stress the importance to engage other actors outside the local public administration, including the private sector, but also other type of actors. I will come back to that. The third point that I want to make is something that I feel has been really missing in the conversation, and we would like it to be put at the core of our work on inclusive growth going forward, is the question of the impact on employment and the economic impact. Many people tend to think it's for medium term. No, it's already there. And local government will have to deal with massive job losses. We know that there are a lot of injections from national government through rescuing packages, supporting individuals, subsidies, wages, and so on. But this is not going to last forever. And we know very well from the lesson of the past that at one stage, local government will have to do with these issues. And of course, there are some regions that will be more affected than others. And in particular, our work has shown that large metropolitan areas are more at risk to job losses than other type of region, because they are specialized, their economies are specialized in those sectors that are more vulnerable to this type of shock that we are experiencing today, at least in the short term. Tradable sectors, some are really tourist destination. We need to think about what will be the future of a city like Venice, for instance. And of course, all this will generate a lot of poverty everywhere, including within cities. Actually, we have a data at the OECD saying that there is a risk of 1/3 of people financially insecure that will fall in poverty quite soon. Local government will also have to deal with the increasing number of bankruptcies of local firms. This is a very serious risk, because we have documented in another committee that half of the SMEs will not survive within the next few months. This is huge, given that they account for 60 to 70% of OECD employment. And we know that they are essential for maintaining the vibrancy of local economy. One can see the drama that is profiling ahead. Last comment, to deal with these rising social issues, the economic fallout, new forms of mobility due to the new constraint. Maybe we'll have to think about new forms of work, not just teleworking, but between working in the office and teleworking, what will be the new type of new forms of works. More than ever, local government will need to work hand in hand and with the local entrepreneurs. And I know Mayor Janković, when I met you, and it's a memorable time for me when I visited you in Ljubljana, you made this point very strong because you used to be an entrepreneur. And so you know very much this their important role. So thank you very much for being with us. Of course, local government, we also have to work hand in hand and much more with their local civic organization and their local social innovators, because we will have to find innovative and new solutions to new problems. They will have to work hand in hand to deliver the social programs with charities, with social enterprises, but also we have seen that more and more a growing number of companies, local companies, they have, including within their, you say their internal mandate, their corporate mandate, a kind of social mission. This is a new trend. So here, the point that I would like to make, and it's the last thing, mayors, local leaders, they have also to find solution working with other stakeholders. And in CHE, because of our different type of constituency, we will do everything to help you in this endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, LAMIA, Director of the OECD Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions and Cities, and pioneer founder of the OECD Champion Mayors Initiative. It's time now to hear from you. So we'll do a warm-up Zoom poll. We would like to invite everybody, the close to 300 participants, to take part in this poll that you will see now appearing on the screen. In your city, who do you think is most at risk from the COVID-19 pandemic? You can choose up to 3 options. So we will take 50 seconds. We are seeing the real-time responses. When you are done, please click on submit. And then we'll have a quick comment and open up for the panel. So I think we are getting close to it. Meanwhile, I invite you all to follow us on social media. Feel free to tweet, retweet what you hear, OECD_local, hashtag Champion Mayors. So if we're looking at the results, I think by far we have as a first category, the low income, economically vulnerable populations. That's over 80%, 85% actually. Followed by the elderly, we have close to 60%, migrants, 35%, racial and ethnic minorities, 32%, people with disabilities, and some of you may have flagged other. If you have other concrete suggestions, please send them via the chat or Q&A function, and we'll make sure speakers have a chance to react in the final part of the webinar when we open up for discussion. Thank you very much for this scene setting. Very interesting to know where we are starting, and it's now my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Mayor Zoran Janković from Ljubljana. In 2018, that's remarkable, you were elected mayor for the 5th time. And actually one thing that is very interesting is that the vision that you have shaped for your city has allowed you actually to enter the 5th place of the Forbes Europe's most idyllic places to live, and I understand you have received many more awards. I think you will be sharing the presentation with your deputy mayor, Tiasha Fitzko, who's in charge of culture, tourism, international relations and development projects. Those are really key portfolios for inclusion. Mayor, you have the floor for 10 minutes.
Hello to everybody. Last 2 months for me were the most difficult months in my 13 years of my career. But also the representative change how we continue to be the most beautiful city in the world, to be the best city, and to serve our citizens. And that was the main idea. Our city must go on. And the second, how take care for our colleagues, our employees. And also at this time, the planet show us what we must do if we want that our nice planet will survive. Also, I believe in this idea, and especially in this time of crisis, that we must continue with the most important idea, to live together and to respect all differences. Now, for this last 2 months, my deputy mayor, Tiasha, will continue because she's really much better in English than me. But
Mayor, thank you for that. I will try to just sum up these past 2 months that have been going on in Ljubljana, and then the mayor will maybe add some of the things. So we decided just to show you one slide because it was a tough decision. There was so much going on in Ljubljana that we could use, I don't know, show you 20 or 30 slides because there was really a lot of solidarity that everyone was showing. But I think that what was crucial, taking care of the vulnerable groups in Ljubljana is something that we didn't start now with the COVID, but it's an ongoing story in Ljubljana that we're really proud of. We have a lot of programs going on. We have really tight relationships with the NGO network on different levels. But what was crucial is that we started communicating and acting really, the first minute. So there was a local crisis board that was created a day before there was the epidemic declared by the national state. So the first thing before communicating with the outside, with publics, we started to communicate internally. So we are so-called big city family of 12,000 employees. And it was really important that all of us know for first of all, that our jobs, that not mine and the mayor's, but the jobs of every person working for the city is secure, so that no one will stay, without a job. That was our first information. We sent everyone home, so everyone could work from home. It was teleworking for everyone, and we did not really check out for the first 14 days whether people are really working or not, because the idea was they should stay at home, you know, stay safe with their families. Because on the national level, everything happened really fast. You know, public transport was banned, schools were closed, all the public life was actually closed. So we had to respond really fast. And this one slide and this one picture that we choose, these are our volunteers. These are our bus drivers who were actually, you know, didn't have anything to do because the public transport was banned at the time. And we knew that we have to take care for the most vulnerable groups. And we knew that first group that we thought of were children from socially deprived environments, families, when they go to school, they, you know, get their warm meals there. And they don't have this stigma as being economically challenged. And now they were at home with no warm meals. So we asked those drivers, the director of our public company, whether, you know, someone would be prepared to be a volunteer. And in only one day, we got 200 applications. So 200 people decided they don't want to stay at home, they wanted to help. And we started with one number of meals. Why? Because we had this new challenge in front of us that parents didn't want all the neighbors to know that they are socially deprived family, that they have problems. So they didn't want, all of them didn't want to admit, you know, that they need this meal. But then with this positive communication, we did communicate, our volunteers, they made some videos, you know, over the Facebook and Instagram and other channels of what they are doing. And a couple of, like a week, I think a week or 10 days later, we had 5 times more applications for those warm meals. So, you know, we helped people to come out, to really say we need this help. And it was really one of the activities that I think it was rewarding for both, you know, for those children and also the elderly who are at home, isolated in a way. So this was the second really vulnerable group. And on the other side, all of those bus drivers who were really, you know, feeling happy that they could help. So it was a really great story that arose. And then the second thing and the second example that I wanted to present at this time was that we also, because all of the museums and all of the galleries and our theaters, everything had to be closed. So we had a lot of colleagues who were really waiting for work, and we have elderly who they had to be isolated because you know, children were not supposed to visit their grandparents because of the possibility to infect them with the virus. So they were really, a lot of people were at home in isolation, and they were just, you know, looking at the television, all the bad news coming to them. So then we thought of this idea to connect those people from the culture sector. So there were a lot of actors and actresses between them. They are famous in our environment. So not only in Ljubljana, but in Slovenia. So all of those elderly people know them. And we connected them. So with a special number that was communicated over the media. So, you know, through the good morning shows that the older people normally look, and they had this free number, and they connected with the actress and actors, and they started to talk. So it was just a small idea, but it grew, you know, really positively, because a lot of these communication pairs now today are also friends. They are now talking every week, and they're talking about different things, about what's going on in the culture sector and what's going on with the families of those people. So these are just two of the examples that I wanted to highlight. But I think that one of the things that was important at the time was that there was someone communicating with all the citizens in a positive manner. So a lot of information were really worrying, you know, really serious press, you know, what will happen. We were following what happened in Italy, that is our neighboring country. So when the situation was really bad, and it was good that we had our mayor, sorry mayor, I have to say that. He, as you said, been a mayor now for a long time, so he has this strong personal brand, and we made a lot of video messages that the mayor was communicating with the citizens, saying that, okay, it's something that's really serious, that we have to take it serious, that we have to stay safe, but at the same time that at the end, everything will be okay. So that we should be, you know, not forget to be, not forget on solidarity, not forget to be friends, and to stay positive. So that was, I think, one of the crucial things, because on the national level, sometimes it was really strict, you know, and really like dark news what will happen in the future. So I think that helped.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Filato and Mayor Zoran Janković for this twin presentation. I think you've emphasized very well how relevant the local scale is for that communication and awareness raising. And that's actually one of the 6 categories that we've used to cluster some of the policy responses we've seen from cities on the COVID-19. And I think the fact that you're recalling your long-standing emphasis on citizens, on firms, on vulnerables, even before the crisis, and how somehow the crisis has accelerated your efforts or even made them more timely and relevant is very enlightening. Not all are new responses that were designed for the crisis, but you've been doing very well at leveraging the infrastructure and the solutions you had in place to put them at the service of vulnerables. Thank you very much for this introduction. We already have a few questions for you. I really invite you all to continue to raise questions on the chat via the Q&A. We are collecting them. We'll make sure at the end we direct them to the right speakers. And also just to note, as some of you are asking, the meeting is indeed recorded. You've had to click on yes before this started, and the recording will be made available to all of you after the webinar, as well as the slides, the links, any type of information that has been shared today. So you'll have the material post-webinar. Let me now turn to our second speaker. Very delighted to welcome Rosannie Filato, member of the Executive Committee and responsible for public safety in the city of Montreal, Canada. In your previous position in the city, you were also responsible for social and community development, homelessness, youth, women, and sports. These are again all big issues that relate to inclusion. And Montreal, for those of you who don't know, in partnership with the International Observatory of Mayors on Living Together, is about to launch, actually in 2 days, a new campaign to highlight the value of solidarity in the context of COVID-19. So we're very happy to have you with us. Rosannie, you have 10 minutes.
Bonjour, merci. Thank you so much to the OECD for having us, for hosting this webinar. Delighted to be here with our colleagues from Rotterdam and Ljubljana as well. Very happy to be here on behalf of Valérie Plante, our mayor, first female mayor in Montreal in 375 years. So we're very, very proud. In Montreal, what we need to know is that we are by far the city that was the most touched by this pandemic. It's not because we did not put all the measures in place with the other levels of government, but we know it's a pandemic that's unprecedented, very difficult to deal with. And we know that the consequences socially are very difficult. So like Ljubljana, very early on, we ensured to put measures in place to make sure that this sanitary crisis would not become a humanitarian crisis. We wanted to ensure that our marginalized and vulnerable populations were considered in all the measures we put in place. We have a very different population in Montreal, depending on the boroughs, depending on the sectors. So there are several sectors where there is more poverty, high population of density, social housing buildings. And we know that population density makes physical distancing more difficult. So we know that it's definitely, and we saw it in the survey that was done, the more vulnerable and marginalized populations, those who are experiencing poverty, see very big impacts of the pandemic. These neighborhoods that I'm speaking of are home to a large number of refugees, asylum seekers as well, who are awaiting a decision from the Immigration and Refugee Board. So these are people who are mostly employed in frontline jobs, who are at much greater risk of contracting COVID. This crisis in Montreal, like many big cities, is particularly difficult for the homeless. At the very beginning of the pandemic, we were evaluating all the measures that we could put in place in order to protect those who don't have a home. As we know, the public health departments reiterate on a daily basis, I would say, stay home as much as you can. And our first reflex at the City of Montreal was to say, what does that mean? What does it mean to stay home when you don't have a roof, when you don't have one? The pandemic, as we heard earlier on, is hitting the economy very, very hard, bringing serious consequences for those in situations of homelessness and those who are becoming homeless because of this pandemic. So our organizations on the territory of Montreal were telling us that they were having staffing issues, that they were having distancing issues, that they would need to close. So very early on, Mayor Plante declared the local state of emergency in order to allow us to put all the measures in place to protect them. So what we did was open several new shelters to allow people in situations of homelessness to have a place to sleep. We accommodate more than 800 homeless people in emergency shelters, the new ones that we opened. We also opened temporary sites and sanitary facilities on the territory because we know that a lot of people in situations of homelessness would go to restaurants or cafes in order to either get some heat, find something to eat, wash up. These were closed, so we opened them up in parks where community organizations were able to handle the situation and help those and serve food. We also requisitioned some hotels, so 5 hotels were adapted in order to accommodate those who were waiting for test results, so in order to give them a place to isolate as well. And for those who are outside of the downtown area, we put in place mobile cafeterias, food trucks in order to offer them some food and some coffee for those, again, who are outside of downtown. We also put in place very early on an emergency fund. We know that the necessity and the requirement to have access to food, so food security, whether it's for children, for the elderly, for families, was becoming more and more difficult. It was becoming difficult for our community organizations to get funding as well. So we continued to give them funding, and we raised with the boroughs and the city and partners over 9 million Canadian dollars in order to distribute to Montrealers in need and to make sure that people had access to the basic need, which is food. We also definitely have to have seniors in mind. We know that they are particularly vulnerable and feel the consequences of this pandemic. We know that the social isolation can be extremely difficult and make them increasingly vulnerable. So we've put into place several measures, such as automated calls. I heard Ljubljana speaking of, the positive messages that needed to be sent to seniors as well. And that's what was important for us. So these calls are done in French and in English. And it's not only to talk about the importance of respecting the guidelines to stay safe and to ensure the safety of others, but also let them know that the resources that are in place at the city, the community resources, the food security resources are there for them, and are there for them in many languages. And I think that's something that needs to be remembered, the communication to our migrant communities. It's sometimes difficult for those who don't speak French or don't speak English in Montreal to know that they have access to these resources. So we put into place fact sheets, which are available in 16 languages, as well as audio recordings of public health messages. Our mayor, actually, Mayor Plante, took the initiative to make a video. I heard that the mayor of Ljubljana did that as well. So Mayor Plante did a video with well-known people in different communities who don't speak French or in English in order to send that positive message and to reiterate the importance of the guidelines in order to stay safe. We all know that the 16th of May is the International Day of Living Together in Peace of the United Nations, in order to promote positive dialogue, diversity. So we put into place a strong anti-discrimination strategy as well, a media campaign, popular education activities, in order to make sure that solidarity would stay amongst our population, who is extremely diverse and which is great in Montreal. We're very proud of that. You know, we also have to think of the recovery, the resilience of our city. As I said before, it's unprecedented now. And, you know, I was very happy to hear at the beginning of the webinar that it's a crisis that can become an opportunity to think things differently, whether it's in terms of mobility, of cycling. We have a mayor and a team who loves to cycle as well, and who thinks that public transit is the way to go in order to have a resilient, a prosperous, a green, an inclusive city. So now that we're thinking how to restart and to support local businesses, for example, we need to restart that in a socio-economic way. So bring funding, for example, to our small and medium-sized businesses. We know they're the heart of our communities. And so at our city, we looked at it through 4 dimensions: solidarity, urban planning and mobility, ecological transition, and economic. So those are really our 4 ways, our 4 key terms in order to build a long-term vision. As you may know, Mayor Plante is part of C40's Global Mayors Recovery Task Force. So we're very happy to contribute on an international level in order to find sustainable economic recovery ways in order to innovate at the city. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Rosannie, for these very concrete examples of not only emergency-related measures that you've been taking in light of this crisis, whether they relate to homelessness or the elderly or migrants, but also for stressing how you've been working with the different cities surrounding you and the boroughs for doing that. I think that shared responsibility is something we're emphasizing very much, and that is very welcome, alongside what you said on recovery and resilience and more long-term revamping of our cities. So thank you very much for this view from Montreal. We are now moving to our 3rd speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce Michiel Grauss, who's the Vice Mayor for Poverty Reduction, Debt Management and Informal Care in the city of Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And actually, before being appointed City Councillor, Vice Mayor, you used to work for the Department of Public Health, Welfare and Care, which is a very timely portfolio for this health crisis that is also an economic and social one. So we look forward to hearing from the city of Rotterdam. Sir, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Before I begin, I would like to thank the OECD for inviting us to the webinar. I listened with great interest to the colleagues from Ljubljana and Montreal. Thanks, and I hope our input from Rotterdam is even interesting. By the way, today we would have celebrated the semi-final of the Eurovision Song Contest. But due to the crisis, the virus, well, I can say you are all welcome next year. Next year, Rotterdam Eurovision Song Festival. I would first like to show you some pictures of our city along with some facts and figures. You can show them now. Komen die in beeld?
Ja, ik zie ze. Hier.
Since 2018, you can see the pictures, I've been a vice mayor for poverty reduction for our city. My most important goal is to break the vicious circle of poverty in the city, with a view to a city in which children don't grow up in poverty. And I don't have to explain to you all that this is a difficult and a long road. Poverty does not only affect people, it affects our entire city. And it also costs a lot of money And solving it is therefore social, but also important from an economic perspective. Fighting poverty isn't easy. It's about low income, but it's also about equality of opportunity, about participation, health, education, housing, etc. That's why I opted for an integrated policy approach, in which I work together with all my fellow board members, with partners, organizations, scientists, businesses, and of course, most important, the people of Rotterdam who have lived or still live in poverty. Our approach has slowly begun to bear fruit. Thanks to an extra 44 million euros, we have an intensive family approach for poor families. We cooperate with a lot of partners. For example, we have a chair of effective approach to poverty at the Erasmus University and the research program of the Rotterdam University of Applied Sciences. We have seen a decrease in the number of people living in poverty. A decrease, but in March, we suddenly found ourselves plunged into the corona crisis. The corona measures affect everyone in the city, and many people are feeling the consequences. As the story of the previous speakers have just shown, inequality becomes more visible in times of crisis. Vulnerable elderly people and families already living in poverty are hit even harder. The gap between rich and poor is widening. But a small positive development perhaps is that we are now able to identify people with financial problems much more quickly. And the taboo around asking for help has been reduced by Corona. And that's because we're now all in the same boat. Shopping, for example, has suddenly become more expensive as there are no more weekly markets. Elderly people no longer dare to go to a food bank or to the family doctor for fear of infection. Families are getting under each other's skin even more due to the restrictions because they generally live in smaller houses. Children are lagging further behind in school because there are no laptops at home or because their parents cannot give them home tuition due to illiteracy, stress, or other problems. Incomes are disappearing because this group often has jobs that are most affected by the measures. Stress and physical violence is increasing. In short, I'm seeing many distressing situations in our city. I'm also seeing a new, different group of people starting to have problems. Rotterdammers with middle incomes and little money of their own. I'm talking about incidental poverty among freelancers, entrepreneurs, students, people working 0 hours or flex contracts. Fortunately, these people are somewhat more self-sufficient. They know where to turn to within a municipality for help and more often have a social safety net. More than 21,000 small business owners have already asked for help. However, problematic debts are also looming for this group. That's why we do everything we can to prevent them from falling into long-term poverty. As a city council, we have learned our lessons from the past. We now know that the number of people with financial problems grow in times of crisis. And we know that because the number of applications for social assistance benefits has grown enormously in recent weeks, the sooner help arrives, the better. Right now, we are primarily dealing with the direct consequences of the corona crisis and limiting its damage, ensuring that people don't have an empty fridge by working together with food banks and local initiatives. We have more close contact with welfare organizations because they are the eyes and the ears in our neighborhoods. Business owners and funds have arranged over 4,000 laptops and Wi-Fi hotspots for school children, and a free newspaper about dealing with money is delivered house to house. We're also trying to respond to problems as quickly as possible. We have intensified our approach regarding debt management by deploying more counselors who work one-on-one in the neighborhoods close to the people. Because the sooner people get help to deal with their debts, the better. For young people without work, there's a budget with which they can bridge the first weeks. As a municipality, we're taking a lenient attitude towards citizens and business owners with problems paying municipal charges. We're making personalized arrangements and not charging interest and cost. We have agreed with housing corporations and utility companies that they will not disconnect Rotterdammers and not evict them from their homes. I'm also seeing a lot of wonderful, spontaneous initiative from residents and businesses in the city. It's so great to see how responsibility and togetherness go hand in hand now. Of course, Rotterdam is also working on long-term plans, despite the fact there's still so much uncertainty. Beneath our city's coat of arms is the text, "Stronger to struggle." After the Second World War, Queen Wilhelmina gave Rotterdam permission in 1948 to add that to its coat of arms. Stronger through struggle. I hope that all Rotterdammers, but also all your citizens, Ljubljana, Montreal, and all our listeners, that we together fight the Corona battle as strong as possible. And I hope in my office to do everything to support them in this endeavor. I wish you all the wisdom in these difficult times, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Michiel Grauss, Vice Mayor for Poverty Reduction, Debt Management and Informal Care of the city of Rotterdam in the Netherlands. Thank you for insisting very much on the damage control. I find the formula very spot on these days, and many very short-term measures, emergency-driven as well, that you had to take, but also for the very humble way you've phrased your forward-looking long-term plans in this very uncertain context. I think that's pretty much what many of our cities are thinking these days. So it's time now to have a second poll and to invite you all to participate before we move to the last speaker and open up for discussion. We'll give you 60 seconds here as where you can pick one of the following options for this question, which is on what is the most important thing that cities should do to protect the most vulnerable? Of course, you could tick all these boxes, but we want to get a sense of what you think today in particular is the top priority. Is it securing access to public services? Is it awareness raising on the crisis and its effects on vulnerable groups? Does it have to do with limiting the economic impact of the pandemic, notably with financial support, ensuring affordable housing? Other, if you have details on the other, you can send them via the chat. So let's take an extra few seconds. That there seems to be a vast majority for securing access to public services, education and health in particular. Don't forget to click on submit when you are done with your voting, so we make sure we can actually integrate all the results. Good, so we have over half of the group, more than 230 people online now, emphasizing local public services, well, public services in general, and a good 30%, if I read well, focusing on limiting the economic impact of the pandemic. Thank you all very much for these views, which I'm sure will echo many of the questions that we have been receiving through the Q&A, so please continue to submit your questions. We have a good dozens of questions now that we'll be directing to the different speakers in a moment. Please also be active on social media at OECD_local, #ChampionMayors. Let us now move to the last speaker, and it's my pleasure to introduce Claire CHARBIT, who is heading the unit at the OECD that deals with territorial dialogue and migration. Claire is the mastermind, the pioneer of OECD's work on the local integration of migrants. She's also working on broader issues related to regions, attractiveness and inclusiveness, and we'll ask Claire to share with us some of the messages that came out of her work and also based on what she's been hearing from the other cities. Kate, you have 5 minutes. Sorry, Claire, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Aziza, and good morning, afternoon, evening to everyone. First, thanks to our panelists for their clear experience sharing and committed messages, and thanks to all participants. I will focus these last words on a category of city population which deserves specific attention in the COVID age. Migrant population, and by migrant population I mean newcomers as well as people with a migrant background. Why is it so important? Because the crisis is a multiple revelator of their concentration in urban areas, of their vulnerabilities, but also of their key contribution to the resilience of our cities. So what is the context in terms of territorial presence of migrants? On average, the majority of migrants, they settle in cities. For example, in the EU, almost 20% of city population is foreign born in cities, while it is less than 7% in rural areas. And they tend to gather in capital cities and their periphery with very high shares in some specific neighborhood. However, migrant presence doesn't mean migrant inclusion. And large cities are affected by segregation in some neighborhoods and suburbs much more than by integration. In this context, the situation of migrants is like an extreme echo of the difficulties that poor native-born people face. On average, their situation is always less good than local citizens in terms of education, jobs, health, and so on. But they have the same type of territorial differences than native-born population. It is easier to find a job in a city than in a rural place, even if it's not so well paid, but with poorer housing conditions. So we also observe, and it's very important for city leaders, we observe that perception of inhabitants vis-à-vis migrant population is related to territorial features. The more, it was a previous slide, sorry, the more diverse the place, and so in large cities, the more positive perception of migrants' contribution, while the higher unemployment rate of native population, the lower level of good opinion. Next slide, please. So what seems to happen with the crisis? Previous panelists mentioned key action to address vulnerable people's situation. We can add a lot of initiatives that local authorities launch, like Montreal, with the support of NGOs and their citizens to respond to migrant-specific needs. For example, they reach out to migrants by providing information on the virus in several languages. It's true in Vienna, in Turku, in Finland. They also found exceptional solutions to host migrants in safer conditions, like in the city of Stuttgart in Germany or Rennes in France. Or they medically assist them, like in the south of Italy in Calabria. Health is a common good. And with the pandemic, it's crucial, both for humanitarian reasons and preservation ones, that everyone in a place can be tested and protected to avoid contamination. This is the case of Singapore. Indeed, foreign workers sleeping in crowded dormitories away from the city center, they were not included in the government's mitigation plan. Nowadays, they represent almost 90% of all cases in the city state. However, what is important for me is to underline something. In this fight against the virus, migrant population became much more visible, not just because of their needs, but also because of their role in matching the need of the native population. You know, there is this idea that the us and them is becoming a little bit more fuzzy with the feeling that we're all in the same boat. Low and high educated migrants are indeed at the front line to pursue core activities. We all know that migrant doctors and nurses largely contributed to emergency health services in London, in New York, in multiple European cities. all activities related to building, cleaning services, food and drug delivery, they have high share of migrants, and some become kind of heroes in some cities. There is a great sentence from Saint-Exupéry, you know, the French novelist. He said, "L'essentiel est invisible. The essential is invisible. The crisis made the invisible visible." My question is, will this perception of mutual dependence and need for cohesion last after the containment? It should. It should, because migrants are key contributors also to economic life of our cities. There will be no Berlin attractiveness without its multicultural diversity. Entrepreneurship, you know, almost 30% of high-tech founders in Europe, they have a migrant background. So I will not give a lot of numbers, but integrating migrants must be part of the city recovery policy. Last slide and last word, please. What I want to underline is that there is a narrow window of opportunities for city leaders to build on this momentum. As it was underlined by our director, high level of employment are expected in urban agglomeration. They will impact on citizens' perception. And what our advice is that well-prepared cities, the ones that are able to measure, to show, to communicate on the key contribution of migrant population and the satisfaction from native-born population with stronger social cohesion, this city, they could make the most of this exceptional period of time. So do not hesitate to communicate, to measure, to campaign, to underline the role of migrants in these essential jobs and creating more win-win situation of common good with, both for locals, for local people and for migrants. By doing so, this city, they will both become more inclusive and more attractive to inhabitants, to investors, and to talent. In 2018, we proposed a checklist for public action to integrate migrants at the local level, and several city case studies to benefit from peer learning. In a nutshell, integrating peoples means integrating policies. So I will not enter in detail. You have the 12 objectives and we can, of course, provide details about that. But I want to thank first, and I'm at your disposal to respond to any question you may have.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Claire. And indeed, we'll be sharing the material with all the link. I really advise you all to go and look at these beautiful reports that are either city-specific or cross-cutting. And that checklist indeed is extremely timely these days and echoes some of the options that were given to you in the earlier poll questions. We are not bad with time, and that gives me now the opportunity to open the Q&A session. We have many questions from participants. We do apologize if we don't get through all of them, but we do promise we'll revert back to you individually with responses for those that won't have been properly addressed in the 15 minutes left. Maybe I would suggest that each city picks 2 or 3. I can make suggestions while reading them. We have a first question that is very straightforward from Yves Zimmerman, and that is directed to the mayor of Ljubljana. How being a former European green capital has been a positive experience to face the COVID crisis? You did mention the planet and environment, so I'll leave you and the deputy mayor respond to that one. We have a question that maybe I'll leave for you, Claire. What kind of knowledge support do you think cities need to handle the COVID-19 crisis for vulnerable groups these days? I have then a question that is directed to Montreal, Rosannie. Montreal is part of the cities with many deaths related to COVID-19, according to Quebec newspapers. What are you doing in terms of density areas? What kinds of measures are taken? And are you also, as a metropolis, planning to do the regularization of non-status populations? Political question, I leave that to you. Another question maybe for you as well, Montreal. In US cities, responses have been mostly led by states. How do you handle these local responses in federal countries? I think if you can elaborate a bit on how you are working with other levels of government, that would be very timely. Another question back to Ljubljana. How are you working also with other levels of government in Slovenia and also with other cities? And how you are planning to recover from COVID-19? So what kind of recovery measures are you putting in place now? Maybe one question that we can take, maybe LAMIA or myself, how will the impact of COVID-19 change urban planning? There is a development on robust public transport that is key to sustainable cities, but are we worried that with the social distancing, this is the return of cars in big metropolitan areas? I can probably elaborate on that one as well. Most of the emergency measures are used by vulnerable groups to pay rents and mortgages. This participates to widen the gap between the rich and the poor. Are representatives of municipalities considering to take measures such as rental control, for example, to avoid this? And a last question, maybe two more that would go to Rotterdam. So the one that would go to Rotterdam is related to multi-level governance. It is crucial to get this done. How is Rotterdam collaborating with regional and national authorities to support vulnerable groups? And there is also a very good question that I think goes to the Dutch culture on whether you see or not room for partnerships between city halls and the private sector to address poverty and bring responses to vulnerable groups. This is a lot. You don't have to respond to all. I have tried to flag where I think you can be complementary with each other. I would suggest that maybe you take no more than 3 minutes each to elaborate on these questions. Maybe I'll start with Ljubljana. If you can come back on this green capital, positive benefits, the post-recovery measures, and how you work with other cities and levels of government. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you for the question. We will try to be short. In terms of the question of European Green Capital, thank you for that question, because I really started to think, and I think that maybe because of this award, or with the help of this award, we were more prepared, you know, and we reacted more easily on this COVID crisis, because in terms of mobility, for example, there were a lot of people, you know, during this process of being European Green Capital, there were more and more people starting to cycle. So it was not, the bike sharing system was active all the time. So when public transport was banned, everyone switched to their bikes. So just a short example. Then another thing, I think local production was something that we really encouraged very strongly during the European Green Capital year. And so we had all the information about the local producers, and we could help them. We upgraded them online, so we could inform all the citizens where they can buy vegetable and fruits, and we helped with the additional income for the producers. So just 2 short examples, and I think of many more. Mayor?
No, it's our government is not my political decision, not my political choice, but we cooperate very good because it wasn't time for political game, but it's time to cooperate because of all our citizens. And cooperating with other municipalities were on the highest level. But maybe it's important now to see what will be the future, because in Ljubljana we decided to continue with all our investments. It's something like New Deal on very, very low local level, very low amount, about 700 euros working investment in Ljubljana, and that had to have all jobs which we had before that. For the future, I learned in '67 that it's a question for all leaders, especially in the strongest state, to stop all wars immediately. That's the first. Syria. The second, I think that this strongest state must help to the poorest country to increase the quality of life, to increase the GDP, and to make this country greener. To stop immediately, to destroy this old forest, especially in Brazil. And that's my question to me, to my colleagues, because in cities, all of the cities, we live more than 70% of all the citizens. But all of us must try to have, as in Ljubljana, the public health center and the public schools. In this moment, in these 3 months, it's so interesting that unexpected crisis of COVID stopped all world in just 3 months. And if you want that this planet survive, in my opinion, all cities all over the world must accept the rules of green capital. That's my wish to my colleagues, and my wish to the strongest leaders. Stop the war immediately, because Ms. Claire, on the other way, on the other hand, we should have so many migrants which want to survive, to find a better life in Europe. I can speak about Europe, but in Ljubljana, we accept them and we live together to respect all differences. We give them health, we give them houses, and it's a part of Ljubljana. I don't know if they want to stay in Ljubljana. Maybe they continue their journey to Germany or to Austria, but in this moment, they are our citizens. Stop the war, help the poorest country, because something must change. In other case, next crisis will be more difficult for all of us.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mayor and Deputy Mayor from Ljubljana. Maybe Rosannie from Montreal, you can take the questions on what do you do for high density neighborhoods? How do you go local in a federal state? I think that's very interesting. And if you wish to say a word on the regulation related to non-status population, Rosannie?
So extremely interesting questions. Impossible to answer in 3 minutes, but I'll do my best. And I'd like to thank the Mayor of Ljubljana for his beautiful message of solidarity to the international population. I think it's extremely important and touching. So in terms of the number of deaths in Montreal that we spoke of, you know, I don't want to substitute myself to the health department. What we're told is that the large number of deaths are in senior citizen homes or in long-term facilities for health. So it's not necessarily by reason of the dense population that the deaths are happening. We do know that we have to have an approach that's intersectional, I think. You know, we often make a lot of links between a certain population, a certain age, a certain form of discrimination. I think we need to have an intersectional gender-based analysis when we put in place any measure, whether it's on the municipal, the provincial, the federal level. And in respect to that, what we're doing now in terms of the density of the population, which is the second question, we're rethinking our whole city. So I talked about urban planning, for example. We know that in more dense areas, a lot of people, a lot of families, a lot of children want to use that space, that public space, the streets, for example. So we're blocking off certain areas, certain streets, so that we can give access to the population, so that they're not exclusively confined in their homes or in the parks. So that gives them more areas to play. And also, when we think of our businesses, for example, we want to continue to encourage our citizens to shop locally in those businesses that are still open because they're essential. But we know that it's very difficult for them to respect that distance, the physical distancing that they need to. So what we're doing is creating with barriers, for example, larger areas where they'll be able to cross paths, where they'll be able to wait in line, respect the physical distancing, but still continue to shop and to encourage locally. In terms of status, I think it's a great example in order the regularization of status. It's a great example to show how we work with other levels of government. So I'll answer those questions at once. we work extremely closely with the provincial and the federal governments. It does have certain challenges. So everything that's relevant to health, everything that's relevant to homelessness, for example, is a provincial jurisdiction. However, I think that can't stop us as local cities who are very close to our populations to take leadership, to take initiatives. And that's why we had declared the local state of emergency, to make sure that we can work closely with our provincial governments in order to put in place these new shelters, which would normally be put in place by the health department. You know, I heard Ljubljana saying that you were keeping all of your employees. We did the same at the very beginning of the crisis. We kept all of our workers at the city, our 25,000 workers, and we asked those who couldn't do work at a distance to act as volunteers if they were available to do so, in order to help us put in place these measures. But we do need to, as cities, continue to take leadership. We know that our federal government right now, what they've told us is they're looking into making the status regular for those populations in need. But we do need to continue to work with all those levels of government. As I said, it has challenges, but we do have a great relationship. Our mayor is with our premier this afternoon.
Good. Thank you very much, Rosannie. And you did respond also on top of those directed to you, to the question on urban planning and physical distancing. Much welcome. Last but not least, for the three cities, Rotterdam, maybe you can pick the questions on multi-level governance and partnerships between private sector and city halls.
Yes, thank you. Rotterdam and the Netherlands, we are for a public-private partnership. That's our trademark. In this crisis, we get a lot of offers from businesses, from individuals to help, but also from informal organizations. There are so much people who want to help. There are more people who want to give and help, then we can get it to the people who need it. So we have directed one of our directors, and he's organizing this. So we reallocated one director for this. For example, I talked about more than 4,000 laptops were paid by a company, paid by public funds. That sounds nice. It is. But in addition, we also needed Wi-Fi hotspots. However, the company in question that was unwilling to abandon its commercial attitude. And that is why a bank and other organization, a bank supplied these Wi-Fi hotspots. So in other words, also when we are in crisis, don't be naive. There's a lot of help, also from philanthropists. I want to give one example. I also put it on Twitter, and that's our food bank. It's a central food bank, not only for our city, but also for surrounding smaller cities. The first 2 weeks, there were big problems. People were afraid for the virus. Volunteers didn't come. The supermarket had not much to give to the food bank, but were only the first 2 weeks. There is a very strong organization in the food bank. It's only by volunteers we work there. After those 2 weeks, it was organized very well. There are new volunteers, more than there were. A lot of elderly volunteers are stay at home, and that's very good, because they have to protect themselves. We now have more volunteers, but also businesses give more food, give more supplies. So if you can see, the stacks are full of goods. So and also the food bank is also the phoning companies. Unilever and other big companies, they say, well, we need this and this and this. And people, our companies help. So just ask your questions and don't be shy or too humble.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. I'm conscious of time, but maybe I will allow Claire. Claire, if you wish to react to any of the questions that I spelled out and give some final words, and then we'll close the webinar.
Thank you very much. You know, I don't want to use too much time just on the question of what is the key information that mayors would need to address the need of vulnerable people. Usually we think about, you know, all the dimensions of well-being. What is the situation of vulnerable families in terms of education, of jobs, and so on? Because poverty is a systemic situation. So it was also said by the Vice Mayor of Rotterdam. What I want to insist on is whatever the grid and the variety of dimensions of information we can collect, it is very important to also ask people who are not vulnerable in the city. Because if you too much devote attention to the weaker ones, there is a risk at the moment that they can be concerned as some kind of privileged in the support received by the municipalities. So it's very, very crucial to monitor simultaneously the need of the vulnerable and the acceptance, the propensity of citizens to help and support them because of the, you know, social cohesion and common good of the city.
Thank you very much, Claire, and thank you all for your participation, both the participants and the guest speakers for joining. I would also like to thank my great team that has set up this webinar, Kate, Laura, Vu, the support team in IT, but also Lucy and Mia. Thank you, Claire and LAMIA, for participating. Maybe just some final words, as you can see on the slide. If you are a city with an interesting initiative that is related to inclusive growth and the fight against inequality, please do get in touch. You have all the contact details on the slide. Let's keep the conversation going over social media via our website. This webinar, as I said earlier, has been recorded and will be made available over the coming few days. We have a few other webinars in the pipeline on issues related to health in cities, inclusive mobility and micro mobility. So stay tuned. We'll have other opportunities to expand that conversation. Thank you all very much. We will send the material to registered participants via email, and I wish you a nice rest of the day or rest of the evening, depending on when you are. Thank you all. Bye-bye.